On the show tonight, I have one of my brothers from another mother, a gentleman who has served the country, and he's an author. And I have so much to say about this guy, and we'll just get to all that. And I also have a photographer who I met at a local New York event, and we've become friends, and we will be weighing in on the topics of today.
We are NYC Talking, the realest lifestyle blog ever, with your host, Angel Rodriguez. Please follow Angel R Talk on Twitter and Instagram. Please like NYC Talking on Facebook. www.nyctalking.com.
Sammy, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, my good man?
Well, I'm from the South Bronx, born and raised in Bronx Lebanon Hospital, right there in the Grand Concourse in Mount Eden. Grew up my whole life there. Used to work for D'Agostino Supermarket, which I think a lot of people know, downtown Manhattan.
You hired me there once, remember?
Yeah, I did. Yes, it was a good job in New York. I miss New York City a lot, and at 22, I joined the military, and I was stationed overseas in Europe, and I spent 6 years in the United Kingdom, or England, for most people to know. And then upon returning, I moved to Pennsylvania, where I've been ever since, and police officer for a while, and I also have been a deputy coroner, where I did death investigations. College graduate, I'm pretty much your typical, atypical for our neighborhood, but I did a lot of stuff. So I'm a polygraph examiner, so I spend a lot of time interviewing people and talking to people. And
you're also an author, is that right?
I am an author, yeah. I wrote a book called Before You Date 'Em, Investigate 'Em. It was something, I was a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, where my job was to find child pornographers on the Internet, people who are actively possessing and sharing child pornography, and what my job was ultimately was to track them down and then serve search warrants on their house and arrest them. What I found, though, is through my investigations and just being aware of the Internet and using it a lot, that there's a lot of people out there who aren't aware of the dangers of the Internet. The biggest one I found was dating communities. I couldn't tell you how many reports I've taken from women, a few from men, where they've met people through online dating services, and there was some bad circumstances, and they didn't know that there's resources out there where you can verify a guy who he is. You can check to see if he has a criminal history, because it is open to the public. And unfortunately, a lot of the women that I was taking reports from were unaware that this gentleman had a domestic violence background, and began stalking them, harassing them through the Internet. And so an idea with a buddy of mine, Louis Savelli, who's a retired NYPD detective sergeant, we came up with the idea of coming up with this book to make people aware of the dangers of the Internet, specifically dating, and also to show the sources of information online that you can find about somebody. And I mean, you could find it, you could use it for just about anything. I have a daughter now, and so hopefully I can teach her what I learned so she can protect herself. But, for anybody that has a wife or a daughter or any children in general, they're going to be meeting people online more than we did when we grew up. And, you have to be aware that, when it comes down, if it sounds too good to be true, you want to trust but verify. And that's what we did. We came up with this book with this idea to hopefully do good and obviously help people out there, not become victims of misinformation and obviously of predators online.
And you also you travel and you train officers throughout the world as well, right? And that's also part of what you've done. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Through Louis Savelli, like I said, he's a detective sergeant retired from NYPD. He was one of the head guys who created the gang task force in New York. He has a private business, and I've been working for him where we go around the country training police officers, both actually not just police officers, federal agents as well. I've taught FBI, ICE, DHS agents, state police, and local police on everything from homicide, crime scene investigations to Internet investigations. I also traveled to Jamaica, where myself and 9 other officers from the United States went down as part of a U.S. delegation to teach homicide and crime scene investigation to the Jamaican constabulary detectives. If you're unfamiliar with Jamaica, Jamaica has about 1,600 homicides a year. They're probably the most experienced detectives that you're ever going to meet with regard to homicide investigation, even more so than the largest police force in the U.S., which is NYPD. Jamaica has a lot of drug problems. Obviously, there's some economical issues, but the homicide rate is astronomical amongst the community. So we went out there to help them, hopefully pass on some knowledge of some of the lessons that we learned. And obviously we came from them with a bunch of lessons that obviously they could teach us because they see death more often than we do. And it was an information sharing type event. We were there for 6 weeks. We met with the Jamaican commissioner, police commissioner, with the Ministry of Intelligence, a bunch of people down there, and shared ideas and shared information. As a matter of fact, I still keep contact with a lot of Jamaican detectives, and when they come to the U.S., I normally meet up with them for a cup of coffee and we talk. And pretty much it's a great opportunity. You see a lot of things. You learn a lot of things from different police departments throughout the U.S. We don't always do it the same. As far as training, money, every agency is different. So one of the things that we do is we go from place to place providing, some training to people that wouldn't otherwise get it or couldn't afford it.
Outstanding. All this experience, man. All this experience. So you bring with you the wealth of knowledge that comes from growing up in the South Bronx, which gives us this, what I like to call street smarts. With these street smarts to survive and just cope with day-to-day life. And in addition to that, you have all this, professional law enforcement experience from all these various organizations and agencies. So you will be a great person to talk to about the topics we'll be discussing tonight. Katerina, are you there, my lady?
I'm still here. I'm kind of just wowed by all that experience.
I know. It's so impressive, right? I'm sitting here, and though I'm hosting the show, I feel like I'm just listening to the show because this guy is so – I'm so impressed.
I'm trying to count down my fingers, and I can't.
Katerina, tell us about what you do.
Well, it's not as good as Sam over here.
I guess I should have. I was gonna do the ladies first thing, but I haven't talked to Sammy in so long. I was so excited, So I apologize for that. For my
fine.
Slip on chivalry there. But please go ahead.
It's fine. All I have to say is, Sam, if I ever meet you, I have to bow down to you.
Oh boy, no, I don't think so.
Just give him a hug. He'll take a hug.
I give you a hug. Do the fake bowing, with my arms, wow. My name's Katerina. I'm a college graduate of Iona College, so shout out to the Gales. Sorry, I'm super discouraged now. Thanks, Sam.
Oh, come on. Come on, we've got like decades on you. You know what I'm saying? So you've got plenty of time to catch up when you reach our age, okay? And all that comes with that.
All right, we'll talk about that in 20 years from now, even though I'm going to still lie if I'm 22.
You do photography, right?
I am a photographer. I am in public relations. I work with Angelique Lozada, who is a personal marketing coach. She considers me her photo media specialist because wherever she does her public relations, I'm always writing up articles and doing press releases and taking photos of each event she goes to. Outside of that, I'm a coordinator for the public relations section of the Artists for Creative Theater. And I'm also starting up my own online publication in which Angel's actually helping me out with, which will be coming out after the new year.
All right. So, Sammy.
Yeah.
My good man, you grew up in the same neighborhood as I did, right? So we're gonna jump into the haps, into what's happening right now. Your story, and I've always told you this as a friend, is fascinating because you for any challenge that I may have had experience growing up, you experienced it like tenfold, right? You were already, as a grown man at 14, 15 years old with your own apartment, right? I remember you had your own place. You were pretty much raising your brother. I mean, for a 15-year-old to be under those circumstances and pull out ahead, I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, you wanna weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, I
It's
talked
your
about
story,
this.
so I don't want to go into any details that you may not want to share. So I want to let you run with that aspect of it. You know what I'm saying?
No, I have no problem with it because I think it's absolutely pertinent to what's going on today, because I think there's a lot of lack of self-awareness. A lot of it is, taking personal responsibility. And I say that because here is my story in a nutshell. And I'm not going to belabor you with a lot, but I grew up as a Puerto Rican kid in the South Bronx. I am the lightest kid in my family. They call me the white boy of my family because I am lighter than everybody else. But ultimately, I'm Puerto Rican. I speak Spanish. Grew up in the South Bronx. I've never met my biological father. And I always tell people with that story, it's a typical story for at least families that I've known coming from my neighborhood. We never knew who our fathers were. My mom died when I was 9 years old from AIDS during the AIDS epidemic. And I pretty much grew up with family members throughout the years, staying with one no more than a year or 2 years, maybe 4 years the most. I grew up on welfare. I grew up with food stamps. I grew up in projects. As a matter of fact, Soundview Projects is where I stood some of my time. And, I had, a rough childhood growing up. I used to fight a lot. I used to get into a lot of problems, in the street. I was patted down by NYPD. When stop and frisk wasn't a moniker that was used, it was just normal police tactics. And, I've been thrown against streetcars and corners and buildings, by police officers a lot for just being on the corner. And it didn't matter that I lived in the building I was standing in front of. That was just the tactics it was. And I hated the police for a lot of reasons. I've been pulled over on traffic stops and told I did something when I know for a fact I didn't. Where I had my wife and my kid at the time, in my car, and he accused me in New York of running a stop sign, telling me my car is a frequently stolen car after I denied obviously running a stop sign, and then changing it up to, my car is a frequent stolen item, which is why they stopped me. So it wasn't because of the stop. The stop sign.
You fit the description too.
Yeah, you fit the description, and
your car and you fit the description. Both of you fit the description.
I mean, I grew up in the South Bronx. I mean, I've been through fights. I had a lot of stuff. Back when I was growing up, we had Zulu Nation, Latin Kings, Nietas. The city was jumping with gangs. We had the crack epidemic that was going on. My aunt was a crack addict before, it was in fashion. I've had uncles who died of heroin overdoses. So, I grew up in an environment that, according to everybody else, I shouldn't have made it. One thing that drew me or actually cleaned me up or my life was the fact that I ran away from home and I wound up become the ward of a state, and I was put in a group home. I was actually in Far Rockaway, Queens, St. John's Homes for Boys, if anybody knows where that is. It's 110 Beach Street, in Rockaway, New York. And I was in an all-boys group home. And I was fighting, and my brother can attest, you'd look at me wrong, I was fighting you. And one day one of the priests, because it was a Catholic-run institution, told me, if you keep on this path, you're never going to make it out of here until you're 21. And at the time, I was only 12. And when he told me that, I realized, I was drinking. I actually drank alcohol. I used to drink Crazy Horse and St. Ives when that was back then.
At 12?
At 12. And, I got into some trouble. And ultimately, when the father told me that and he took me under his wing, he actually did not let me hang out with everybody else in the home. He made me work in the warehouse cleaning up donations that were brought in. I realized that this wasn't for me, and I didn't want to be here for the rest, for the next 9 years. locked up in it was a prison type setting, barbed wire fences. We only were allowed to go from one yard to another yard, which is only for school purposes. And
Right.
I realized
most folks may not know what group homes are like here in New York, but like you said, it's pretty much like you're in prison. You're being
it wasn't
detained.
Sparford.
You're scrapping to survive, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, it wasn't a Sparford, and anybody knows Sparford is out in Brooklyn. That's like prison where you're treated in a militaristic type. It was bad. It was like being on Rikers Island in Sparford, and a lot of guys can talk about it. I was never in that. I was in a more a better facility, but it was still a facility nonetheless. I wasn't with family. There was 10 groups of kids in an apartment, and we had a counselor that would stay with us 24/7 to watch us, to make sure. And there was kids from all over the city, from every borough, that were either given away, trouble, didn't have families, were orphans, that kind of thing. And so, we grew up in that environment, and ultimately, when that priest gave me that realization or that reality check that for the next 9 years I could never, be with my family, be locked up in here because of my behavior, I don't know, something clicked, and I decided that this wasn't for me. And then my stepfather got me out of the group home, and at age 13, we were there for about a year until my stepfather, my brother's father, got me out. And then from then on, due to circumstances, he kind of went his own way, and I used to pay for an apartment with my mom's survivor's check when she died. We used to get a survivor's benefit check, which was a $300 check that me and my brother got because of her death. It was a death benefit. So I would take that check and combine them and pay the rent. And then I worked part-time and would buy food and everything with the rest of the money. And never really had a childhood, and I just moved on and got work. And I had some good people who, I worked for, who looked at me and saw potential and gave me opportunities that I would never have. And, then the rest is history. Today I sit before you, a master's degree holding, with a family of my own, and, a distinguished career in the military and police. And if people knew my life history, and I don't tell everybody, and probably now, your audience knows, but I mean, I would have been written off. The narrative that I grew up under, I would have been written off, and it would have been okay. People would have looked at it and go, based on the way he grew up, we understand why he acts the way he does. But I don't think that's right. Eventually you have to take responsibility for yourself and your actions. And I think it took a little while, and I sacrificed my childhood, obviously, but I think it makes me who I am today. I think my past history makes me a better police officer than most. And obviously I can talk to, a litany of examples of where I've dealt with kids and families here in Pennsylvania that are from New York, and tell them, hey, I know what it's like, because most think you don't. They just look at the uniform and badge. I can't tell you that people cannot tell faces, no matter plain clothes or in uniform.
They can't read the story.
Well, we're all the same. We're all badge and guns, and I could walk up to somebody who I had a 2-hour conversation out of uniform, and they won't recognize me. You know why? Because all they saw was the badge and the uniform. They didn't see the human behind that uniform, and we all have stories. So, I mean, that's pretty much it, and I probably took up too much time. But
well, it's going to give perspective, right? It gives perspective into what we're talking about. Katerina.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned before, moments before the show started, that you somewhat take offense to how some individuals are referring to the protesters as criminals. What are your thoughts on that whole situation at the moment?
Would I call them criminals? No, because they're all outraged by what's going on. Do you blame them for being upset?
It's legitimate. You have a right. This country, we have a right to protest, to go out in the street, and to proclaim our, aggravation with the criminal justice system, with the people in charge, with the way that this incident was handled. It's totally different than to go out and commit intentional acts of vandalism. Those businesses are actual businesses that pay the taxes, that pay for the utilities and the public works and everything for that community that those people are vandalizing. So what they're doing is putting people who pay taxes to that community, they're putting them out of business. They're damaging them. And yes, the insurance is going to cost them. It's going to cover a lot of the damage, and what's going to happen, premiums are going to go up. There's a litany of cause and effect here that people are not looking at.
Not guilty.
It's not guilty. Let me explain to you how this process works. A grand jury it's a special jury that's convened by a district attorney in the areas that they're at. There's 12 jurors and there's alternates that come in. They're actually selected to review. They do cold cases. Most times grand juries are brought in for cases where they're very sensitive, high-profile cases, or, they go cold cases where they're looking at cases from 20 years ago and DNA evidence is in. One of us in this, me, Angel, or Katerina, we either one of us can get a subpoena in the mail saying you have been selected for jury duty. And you can be on a grand jury one day. And you're sworn to secrecy. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. You're not allowed to talk about the proceedings and testimony in the grand jury proceedings. And, there's a process to it. It's actually it's an old process that we've had in place for centuries. Okay. For the last 200 years, that process has been in place. And the purpose of that is a grand jury allows you to do certain things against the defendant, believe it or not. It allows the prosecution more leeway to get more evidence that they wouldn't otherwise get in another way. A grand jury subpoena.
You can't even argue that it was the jury. The grand jury already existed. So whatever their beliefs are going to be are already there.
Correct. It's the same as a trial. The difference between is that this level or this jury, their responsibility is just to determine if there's what's called prima facie, probable cause to charge somebody with the crime. Now I'm going to give you, there's a case, 1989 case that's going to set this whole tone. It's called Graham versus Connor. And I suggest you and the audience read Graham versus Connor with regard to the Supreme Court and what they said about use of force and officers, how that the officer will not be judged by 20/20 hindsight, meaning we're not going to look after the fact and say this is what he could have done. I always equate this to the South Park episode with Captain Hindsight, when he would just appear and give everybody what could have happened or what should have happened. The Supreme Court, the largest court, the top court of the land, has already said we will never judge a police officer on 20/20 hindsight. We will judge by the objective reasonableness at the time and based and with the circumstances that the officer was facing at the time. Under that case, under that precedent that was set back in 1989 and has been upheld for years, that case itself is that it's not 20/20 hindsight. It's not, well, they could have shot him in the foot or shot him in the arm or tased him in the back. No, it's based on what that officer was facing at the time he was facing it and what the standards were. Everybody thinks they know what a grand jury is. And everybody says we should have a trial. You know what happens in a trial? The trial happens is the defense attorney convolutes everything. He gets to throw in little things and confuse the situation, and the facts don't get heard. The grand jury, without anybody convoluting it, without anybody objecting, without people putting in and preventing evidence from being admitted, everything was admitted. So if anything, the grand jury process was even fairer and we're more likely to get the officer indicted because the officer, believe it or not, when he testified before the grand jury, testified without counsel. You're not allowed to have an attorney before the grand jury when you testify. So he had to give his response, and the 12 jurors had an opportunity to cross-examine him without an attorney, without the advice of counsel. And that shows you how far that this jury went to make their decision. Because in court, that will not happen. You don't have to testify as a defendant in court. You can object when a witness comes on stand. You can destroy somebody's credibility on the stand. An officer-involved shooting is not something that always goes to a grand jury. Sometimes that's just dealt with inside the department with the district attorney looking at it. It doesn't necessarily go to the grand jury on most cases. The bottom line is, I give this back to you. People always say, well, why was he shot 10 times? The only thing I can relate to you is, I'll ask you a question. Katerina, have you ever been shot?
Yeah, but I can't not to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, I've never been shot, and I don't think you've ever been shot. But if you've ever been in a situation, I revert back to my training videos. It's one of the earliest videos I've ever seen. I was down at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in 2005. We were shown a video of a deputy down in the South who was involved in a fight with a guy in a house. That deputy was in a brawl with this guy. It was a domestic. He was in brawl with him, and he actually shot the guy 10 times. Well, people goes, why did you shoot him 10 times? Well, one thing that without seeing the video, you think, oh, my God, 10 times. Throughout the course of the fight, the guy was shot 10 times, meaning that every time he shot him, the guy kept attacking him, kept going at him, kept fighting him, regardless of how many times this officer shot him. He actually did not collapse the entire – and I watched the video because you could see the video of them fighting because he had a body camera, and you could see them fighting in the apartment. And the guy was shot 10 total times and was still fighting the officer as if he was never shot. And so this idea that people just drop, like Call of Duty or Battlefield 4 or all these video games, that people, you shoot them once and they drop, because one bullet supposedly goes through people and drops, is false. Bullets don't just go in and stop you. Depending on where the bullet hits you on the body, it can go through and through and not even affect you. Ask military veterans who've been in war. Or depending on where it's hit, the vital organ will survive long enough that you can still fight. The other factor that people fail to recognize here is the fight or flight syndrome, this autonomic nervous system, and I speak about this in my polygraph examinations because that's how polygraph works, based on your autonomic nervous system. Bottom line is, when you're in a fight, flight, or freeze situation, you're going to do whatever it is your body intends for you to do. If you're in a fight situation, you're going to have adrenaline running through your body that will keep you going as a survival mechanism. So I'll give an example, Faces of Death. Another example, if you ever watched the video series, Angel, you remember Faces of Death from back in the day?
I do recall.
Do you remember the guy who jumped off the building, landed on the sidewalk, got up and ran 20 feet? All right, there's a couple of videos of guys who jumped off buildings, got up because of the adrenaline rush and ran 20 feet, 30 feet. And they just fell off of 6-story building. Ultimately, this idea that people drop with one bullet is false, okay? And I just wanted to address that because there's this idea everybody focuses on the 10 shots, and they weren't 10 soccer shots in succession. They're also, it depends on where he shot him, whether or not those shots were impactful, okay, whether or not they were stopping shots. And so, you got to look at the entire picture. There's a lot of people who have no knowledge of this stuff who are just believing what they read on the internet. And the fact is there's more here than what's being relayed.
I've actually seen, when I was in high school in Dodge, there was a fight. 2 gentlemen were fighting. One of them pulled a gun, shot the guy. The guy looked where he was hit, and he continued fighting. He came at the guy. He still punched him and kept punching him. And the guy shot him again, pop, and the guy kept hitting him. The guy didn't drop. I was looking out the window from the school. I was looking out the window, and the guy did not drop. He just kept hitting him. Now, I don't know if he ended up dying from his injuries later on, but for that period in time, pop, he shot him. I saw this. I was looking out the window. Shot him, and first he hit him in the shoulder. The guy looked at his shoulder and just kept punching him. Then he shot him again, and he kept punching him. And, ultimately, the police showed up and broke it up and tackled everybody, so I don't know the end result. But I saw with my own eyes someone get hit and continue fighting. I've seen other methods deployed, pepper spray. I recently posted a video of a fight between an officer and a gentleman in the subway, and the officer pepper sprayed him, and the guy kept coming at him, attacking him, and he was wrestling with him on the floor, and they're hustling, and as a person that's carrying a firearm, you can't get into a wrestling match. What happens if I knock you out and I take your weapon? I may get the best of you.
And that's the point. That's the point that people have to understand, is that there's always, regardless of who, there's always one gun in every encounter with the police. There's always one gun, and that's the police officers. So if there's a situation where that police officer becomes incapacitated, that gun is no longer on that police officer. Somebody else can take it. And now that becomes a deadly force situation. An officer can't get into a fist fight with somebody, and most people forget that, is that we are not out there to get in a full-on fist fight with somebody, because we have to think about the tools on our belt, the gun on our side, and if we get the boxer's chance, which is somebody punches you and gets the best of you, that gun is no longer on you. That person can kill you and then start shooting anybody else in the area. So, the mindset of an officer is totally different. It's not a one-on-one fight between two non-armed individuals. It's, I got to restrain this guy, but restrain him enough to a point where I prevent him from taking my gun and killing me. And that's what others. Killing me or others, exactly. I mean, most times when they're fighting an officer, it's for that officer. And so those are the circumstances that we're talking about.
Let me give you a smaller background about myself. I worked in Mount Sinai Hospital from the ages of 14 as a volunteer till the age of 17, where I was actually working there for about a year. My mother works there up to this day. I've grown up around police officers in which I've seen them personally also screw up. And at the same time, we don't see the NYPD and the commissioners making these changes. In my opinion, why don't they do a better screening of these people? I understand they need police officers, but to what extent are you going to be taking people on? Maybe the police test needs to be examined, and that's a higher qualification.
That's also on a higher level too, guys. I hate to cut you guys up. I want you guys to share your social media, Katerina, if people want to connect with you. How will they find you?
You can find me on my personal Facebook, Katerina Koufalis, or Instagram, KatieKay_photography XO.
Sammy?
I don't have one anymore, but the book can be purchased on Amazon. You can either look it up by my name or through the name of the book, which is Before You Date 'Em, Investigate 'Em. And that's pretty much it. I mean, anybody had any questions, I mean, I gladly answer. They could reach you and you could reach me. I mean, I have no problems with it. I can't speak to NYPD because I don't work for NYPD, but I know there's three sides to every story that, and that's one of the things people got to keep in mind, but that's it.
And arguments.
I'm sorry?
And arguments.
Yeah. Well, it's not an easy topic to talk about, and I really wish we had more time, but Sammy, Katerina, thank you guys so much for joining me. This was really cool, very informative. Katerina, I know we talk a lot, so we talk a lot. But I'm going to bring you back. I want to bring you back so we can discuss the other topics that we had planned to talk about. Thank you guys for coming on, and thank you very much, everybody.
Bye, guys.
www.nyctalking.com. Thanks for listening.